Hello, everyone. We are live. Thank you so much for joining us for this summer press publish live stream, where I talk to fellow newsletter writers that I very much admire, not about their content, but about their craft. Today, I'm really excited to be talking to Marvin Barth, a writer I first came across last year via a wonderful series he wrote on global entropy. I mean, just that title alone obviously was crafted to get my attention. And it came at the intersections that I've been covering, but from a breadth and depth of learning I could only aspire to. And it wasn't just the big picture lens of Marvin's approach that grabbed me. It was also the excellent writing and the energy he brought to it, but also the tone. Marvin doesn't write, like many do, as someone who knows everything or wants us to think he knows everything. Rather, Marvin writes like an explorer. He's enjoying the journey and he wants to share with us along the way what he is discovering. So I then found out that the publication that I had found, which is delightfully called Seriously, Marvin, was just one of his outlets. He has another weightier publication called Thematic Markets and a podcast called Thematic Edge, which he co-hosts with investor Mark Farrington, which is now one of my must-listens every other week when it drops. So, Marvin, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you for having me on, Noel. This is a real pleasure, and I've been a big fan of yours, so I'm glad to see that it's reciprocated there.
Thank you very much. And I imagine it's a nice change to not be talking about markets or macro and everything, as interesting as that may be, and we'll get to that. But again, I want to find out more, and I'm sure our listeners do as well, our viewers, why you do what you do and how. So I'm going to start by asking you to give us a brief background. If I asked you to give a full background, it would take the entire half hour that we have. So a brief, because you have had an interesting life. A brief one, please, and anyone who wants more detail, go check out his bio on his websites.
Yeah, the bio on my website, there's a long form bio there that is basically a short story in and of itself. So I refer everyone to that. But I grew up in a military family, mostly in California, in the Central Valley, a farming community. Went on, studied economics, rather not episodic, path dependently. It just happened, and I ended up going on and pursuing a PhD in it. Went to the Federal Reserve. They sent me to the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, which is sort of like the central bank to central bank. So I got to see how other central banks thought about the world, and then went to markets for a few. Came back to Washington to work at the U.S. Treasury Department. I was the chief economist for international affairs. Then went back to markets again for many years, and ended up settling here in London. I've been here in London for about 13 years now. This is actually my second tour. I was here for 3 years, 20-some years ago. And I started Thematic Markets accidentally. I mean, I'm perhaps precipitating your next question,
Yeah,
but
keep going.
but it was I was working at Barclays. I was leading foreign exchange and emerging market research there. Had an interesting opportunity to go join some friends to start a venture capital fund in advanced technologies and defense, which was something I was very passionate about. This was pre Ukraine war, and I thought, look, the West is all the things that people have now learned in the last few years is really losing ground to state capitalists in terms of technology, in terms of industrial production, all of these different things. I wanted to try and do something to change it. That didn't work out, but on the side, I thought, oh, I love doing macro. this is something I would do no matter what. This is just what I have fun doing, is trying to sort of solve the global puzzle of what is going on in the world. And so I just started. Somebody suggested I, start doing this on Substack. So I did. It was sort of like a little side thing at first. When the venture capital fund didn't work out, it's become sort of my main job.
Isn't that amazing to be able to actually earn a living doing something that you would be doing anyway? I think it's the ultimate
Yes.
luxury. And one of the things that you've no doubt found in your wanderings through the halls of financial authorities is that macro may sound very boring. Economics sounds very boring to those that have not actually lifted the lid on how much it matters to the day to day. And it's one of these things I found that the more you learn, the more you want to learn. It gets more interesting the more you know. And I had an economics professor at university once that told me, I don't know more than you don't know. And that blew my mind. I said, how can that possibly be possible? You're a professor at the London School of Economics. How do you? He said, because I know I don't know it. And this is something that comes through in your writing. As I said in the intro, and I do mean it, you're one of the very few that doesn't sound, again, I'm trying to be tactful and diplomatic here. You don't sound like you think you know more than the rest of us. You sound like you sound like you care more than the rest of us, and you want us to care also.
Oh, well, I really appreciate that. I do sometimes err on the side of being a little bit vainglorious about getting things right, but uh,
You're
it's
allowed the odd "I told you so" because you've earned them.
well, I appreciate that, but uh, to exactly what you were just saying about this professor of yours, LSE, when I was in graduate school, this if you're a PhD student there, you have your own office. It's not your own office. You get to share it with a couple of other people. And the office across the hall from mine, somebody had taped, remember the old days when we had newspapers and people cut things out of newspapers and taped them up?
I
It
I
was-
I started at clipping files and sorting out all the stories.
exactly. So, or the old days when cut and paste was literally cut and paste.
Yeah.
But they had this little newspaper clipping, and it was this quote from this person. I don't recall who it was who said, uh, a when you think you know everything, they give you a bachelor's degree. When you realize you don't, they give you a master's degree. And when you realize nobody else does either, they give you
That's
a
the PhD.
PhD.
That's
And
brilliant. I love that.
it is a good description. I would say I think it's a better life description than degree progression description. 'Cause I do find, to your point, too many PhDs I come across still are stuck in that bachelor's degree. I know everything.
Mm. Yeah.
And
And
you're never gonna learn doing that. That's just
no. And in the halls of the elite financial institutions that you know well, many get stuck there and they don't actually get out into the markets and talk to investors, whereas you did. And so you have a totally different viewpoint. I want to touch briefly on your production function. I hate that phrase. But one of the reasons I love your Thematic Edge podcast is the geopolitical angle that you and Mark tend to bring to it. This also infuses your writing in Seriously, Marvin and Thematic Markets. But was that always the case? Were you always focused on the geopolitical angle?
So I've always had very broad interests. When I said before that my path to economics was path dependent, what it was is that I went to UC Berkeley as an undergraduate, and I had no idea what I wanted to study because for me, I was interested in literally everything. I just you talk to me about almost any subject, I'm interested in it. I want to find out more. I'm just naturally curious that way. And UC Berkeley just happened to have this dual track economics degree program that was, they may not have this anymore, but at the time, there was one that was like sort of a fake economics degree that you only had to take like 4 upper division classes to fulfill. The other one was like hardcore math, go get a PhD. And so I did the first one and basically then took a liberal arts degree, but liberal arts education, studying everything. And my degree still said economics. Now, because I went on for a PhD, I probably should have done the other one. But the point is, I have always been just curious about everything. And I was raised in a military family. So, obviously, defense technology, strategy, all of those things have always been something I've been quite interested in. And when you move to the macro environment, and in particular the global macro environment, the way I think about the world is very much as what an economist would call general equilibrium, thinking about all the different things that are affecting prices and output and everything all at once. Well, that's if you do that broadly enough, and you should when you're really thinking about global markets, that should include politics, it should include geopolitics, it should include, frankly, cultural trends, all of these sorts of things. And so that's kind of always been my approach, is to take the fact that I'm intellectually curious about everything and think broadly about every problem I address. And I think that's kind of been one of my advantages in doing macro, is that I approach it from that very broad perspective.
And that's particularly relevant these days when everything is changing. And, for many of us, that may seem like a recent phenomenon. It's actually not. Things have been changing for a while. Only we can perhaps agree that the pace seems to be picking up. In other words, good timing.
Yeah, I do think, right now there's something very interesting taking place, which is, and to your point, it is a lot of luck. Is one, um, we are in a world of transition. The global order that we had for 50, 70 years started to break down in the 1990s, and I would argue was basically completely broken down a decade or so ago. But other people think that it's only just started to break down now. No, it's manifestation now.
Maybe it's louder now.
Yes. Yeah, well, you certainly have more colorful personalities in some of these. And so one is that creates a lot of uncertainty and transition and newness that sets up the way I tend to think about these problems. The second is that we had this tremendous revolution over, say the 1970s through, one could say it's still going on in, quantitative analysis. Everyone and their mother had started studying this. You develop all these fantastic quantitative methods, and everyone started to think, "Wow, this is a fantastic way to explain everything." And it's true unless you don't have data or unless you have no experience with this. So, unfortunately, a lot of the things we're going through right now, we either have no experience with, or we have, a couple examples scattered across hundreds of years of changes in global power structures and things like that. And so that forces you to actually rely on theory and logic to try and solve problems rather than quantitative. So where everyone else has been going down this path of doing things quantitatively, I fortunately, at a time of great transition, seem to have a different approach. And the irony of that is the place I went and got my PhD is probably, at the time, was certainly the premier place in the world to study time series econometrics. I mean, two of my professors that I studied closely with won Nobel Prizes for econometrics. So I'm not non-quantitative. I saw that that path leads to a lot of problems.
Because numbers become their own rule and facts these days have different meaning. Now, I want to ask you about your day to day, but I also have a bigger picture thing I want to talk about first. Before we get there, got Seriously Marvin, you got Thematic Markets. How do you decide what goes into which?
That's actually uh, an increasing problem. I think I've started to blur them, but thematic markets is my institutional grade research. That's
That's what people
really,
pay for.
yeah, and it's much more sophisticated, detailed, robust analysis. I do a lot of quantitative work in it. I do a lot of really unconventional analysis. I put in, um, uh, market trades, often very sophisticated trades, complex option strategies, rate strategies, foreign exchange, equities, across the board. Seriously, Marvin was, all credit to my fiance. Joy, who I'm sure will come up in this because you want to know how I do things. Um, she said, you have all these crazy ideas all the time. Why don't you just write them down and send them out and put that out as a free product? You don't have to research everything, because my backlog of things that I actually want to research is insane. It's a huge backlog, and I'm never getting to it. And she's like, "Why don't you just write this stuff down and you know, we'll start publishing that." And she was also the one who came up with the name Seriously, Marvin. So,
Why is it something she says often?
uh, um, well, she just says seriously. Or smacks her forehead or
It's like,
something
for
like.
real? Nice.
Yes, exactly.
It's
So
amazing you say that. I often get asked, because I try and publish generally daily, and I often get asked, "How do you come up with something to write about every day?" And my reaction is, "You should see my backlog." Every day there's 3 or 4 things that go onto my backlog list that I didn't get to because of lack of time. And I think that is a symptom also of just how interesting the intersections that we're
yeah.
focusing on look at. Now, if I get into the big picture, what's your day-to-day look like? How do you divide your time between all of your outlets?
Uh, I don't think that there is a, s clear pattern, and I think that's part of the pattern. So I've found that I am most effective and efficient when I'm, um, mixing it up. So, you know, I noticed this when I did my PhD. I did my PhD in 4 years. I was working, 2 different jobs while doing it. Um, then I went to go work for the Federal Reserve Board in Washington, and I felt like I wasn't getting anywhere near as much done, but I was going to the office from, 7 in the morning until, 6, 7 PM at night every day, or every weekday. And what I realized was when I was in graduate school, I didn't keep a fixed schedule. I was always just sort of keeping myself. I'd get bored with something. I'd go surfing. I'd come back, do some more studying. I'd go on a bike ride, whatever. And I found that's very helpful for my creative process. And then once I get into something, I will work at long lengths to finish things. But I tend to do things in a rather random pattern. If that helps. I don't know.
Yeah, just get the stuff out however it happens to come to, and also the inspiration for the topics. It can come from so many different sources. I imagine you don't get a lot of surfing done in London, but you row, right?
Yes, I row, and I also I walk to work every day. So, that always gives me time to just think, ruminate on ideas. I listen to a lot of podcasts, things like that while I'm walking. So if you see me walking down the King's Road in London, I will either be busily tapping away something like some note to myself about, oh,
Hazard.
actually, I had a great idea. I'll write this down right now while I'm
Hazard.
walking. Or,
Oh
yeah,
dear.
exactly. I am a
So
hazard.
cross to the other side, everyone.
Yeah, exactly. Or I'm listening to a podcast, thinking about, oh, that's an interesting problem, something like that. So it's trying to, it is the same thing. It's keeping yourself curious about lots of different things.
Yeah, keep the neurons moving. And this brings me to something that I've often wondered about and haven't figured out is the time separation between learning and thinking. We often conflate the two, but they're not the same, are they? You can be learning and ideas will come to you, but it's not the same as sitting down and actually thinking about the bigger picture that you focus on.
Well, that's very true, and I find that a lot in, my research where I'll have an idea, I'll start sketching something out, and the piece will end up being quite different than what I had anticipated, or maybe turn into a couple different pieces, because I start doing research along the way, and I'm like, "Oh, well, actually, that's not exactly what I expected. Oh, but this is really interesting over here," and then you go down that path, and next thing you know, you've written something very different.
Yeah. Oh, that happened to me so many times. I used to write opinion columns for CoinDesk and then American Banker for a while, and I would start writing, and I would just sort of pray that I would land this thing before the word count expired. I had no idea what I was going to say, but something would come to me, and eventually something always did. Now, on the bigger picture side, again, you sort of randomly the topics come to you. You decide whether this feels like a thematic markets or this feels like a seriously Marvin. I imagine there's also some fuzziness between the two. Something that starts out in serially Marvin could maybe morph over into a more detailed thematic markets piece.
That's generally what the idea was supposed to be. As I said, it was supposed to be things that I haven't had time to research, that I just wanted to throw some ideas down. I think I haven't been as disciplined recently in terms of adhering that, and I think some of my seriously Marvins have gotten a little bit more technical than they probably should be. So I should probably rein that in, because that, I think, blurs the line. But also, there are lots of people who are subscribing to seriously Marvin because I think it was a lot easier to read than some of my other stuff, which can be quite technical.
Yeah, but I bet there's quite a lot of people who start out in Seriously Marvin and then will eventually, go to the weightier paid
Oh, I hope
subscription
so.
of thematic markets. That's the point. That's part of the point. Although, no, I don't think that's the point with you. You seem to just do it because you like the intellectual exploration. If it happens, fantastic, but it's certainly not a content leader, or as the media people would probably say. Now, does AI help you with your research?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
How do you use it?
So the biggest way that I use it is mostly on the thematic market side to help me program things. So, my productivity in terms of being able to do all sorts of sophisticated analysis has gotten so much higher over just the last couple of years. When I hear these people arguing about, oh, AI, it doesn't really add to productivity, I'm like, are you kidding me? Are you nuts?
Yeah.
This is not even a question. I could not do half of what I do, and that's just on the thematic market side. And then I do find that it is really useful more broadly in um, uh, research, um, asking it questions, and sort of in a couple of different ways. So one, when you have a sort of long career that spans a lot of different areas like mine has, you have a vast repository of knowledge that is going to infuse your ideas and writing. But a lot of things, I just forget the details of it. I'm like, how exactly that happened?" And so I'll ask
Yeah.
a variety of different AIs. And I do have these funny conversations with them where, they'll tell me something and I'm like, "No, you're wrong. I was actually in the room for that conversation. This is what happened." And then they're like, "Oh, wait. Okay, you're right.
So glad you pushed back on that. You're quite right.
Oh, you're so brilliant. You're the most amazing thing ever." Yes, that is another problem with these AIs. But
Yeah.
uh, um, so you do have to be very careful, but it does help. One, you recollect things that happened and get at least the sequence right or things like that. But it also, I find that it helps me learn a lot of things. I can go out and fact check a lot of things. I don't trust that it's right. I will then go and check those things myself. But it at least very quickly summarizes and gets me in the sort of ballpark of where I want to go. So that's very helpful for my broader writing.
Mm. And again, the fact checking and charts, are you up at that level yet? I'm not.
I do not. I do not use it for that. There's a few different things that I definitely need to do. One, like, I'm famously terrible about putting together presentations to see clients and things like that. And I'm sure that I should be able to use AI to say, "Here are these things. Go put together a presentation for me based on these things I've written." I'm sure that that's one. The other one is using these agents. So Um, uh, I do uh, most of my analysis, I would argue, is quite original, right? Like I created de novo, um, uh, as part of the exploratory process, looking at some new question, and often I don't come back to it, but I have clients coming back to me asking about things. So, for instance, last year I was highlighting when everyone started worried about non-farm payrolls slowing down. I did this work, first of all, showing the obvious thing that, when you cut off immigration and you take account for the aging of the population, retirements, things like that, actually, the break-even rate of non-farm payrolls is pretty low. That's pretty straightforward. Um, but I also did this stuff looking at people like you and I, so-called solopreneurs. And uh, the analysis was I've never seen anyone else do it, and there are these data out there, and I had to like really dig and find this stuff and figure out how many of these people are basically creating their own jobs for themselves doing this, because that's not captured in the employment data. It's not there. So that's missing. So if that's growing and we're saying, oh, non-farm payrolls is growing like this, non-farm payrolls ain't going to show you that. And so you should add that number to it. And that means that the US economy is actually growing a heck of a lot stronger than people think. So my point about this is I did this work and built some sort of agent to go do that on a month by month basis for me, but I'm having clients do it. So that's a type of thing that I need to go back and invest some time to go actually do, because I think that's another area where I can just add a lot of additional insight and help to my clients, and the productivity tools are just there, sitting there waiting for us.
They're there. They're not as easy as people make them out to be, though. I keep trying to set aside a few hours on a Sunday afternoon to get to grips with Claude and charting and stuff. But then there's this BIS paper that I could read, or the IMF has said something, which is so much more interesting to me. This summer, it's on my list this summer. Now, there is a segue into solopreneurs on Substack, but I'm going to delay that for a second because I do want to get to the bigger picture question that I've been teasing. And this is coming down to the sort of why you do what you do. We know that this is fascinating. You learn by writing. And you're the kind of personality that would want to share what you're learning. You're here to help people understand. But 5 years from now, let's project forward. 5 years from now, what would you have been proudest of?
I think uh, you know doing really innovative, interesting research that helps people better understand the world around them. So, I still point to actually the piece that I launched thematic markets with. Is not the only piece that I think is really interesting and innovative that I've done over my career, or even since I've started thematic markets. But I would point to it as one of the best pieces of research I've done in my career, and it's something I think is truly additive to the field of economics. It's not published in a journal anywhere or anything like that, but it's the dollar has, if you look at the dollar on like a trade weighted basis or dollar index or something like that, has these big cycles that don't match up to business cycles, don't match up to monetary policy cycles, anything. It's been this big mystery, as long as I've been an economist. People have been wondering what causes these things, right? Well, I solved it. Right? I wrote a paper. I figured it out and wrote a paper about it. I'm super excited about the fact that I was able to do that when so many other economists out there have failed on this. And I hope that I can look back in 5, 10, 20, whatever years, and look back and say I did that 5, 10 more times.
That's an awesome goal. That really is, because you're not just repeating, which again we see this a lot, especially on Substack and on X, a lot of repetitive stuff, especially for the clicks. But no, you're going deeper. You're offering something to the jigsaw puzzle. I see this as a jigsaw puzzle that is changing shape just as we keep adding pieces as well. Now, I want to move on to media, because while you do swim in the macro markets, geopolitical waters, you are also a media entrepreneur by launching your Substacks and your podcast. And what's your take on Substack's impact in the communication scene?
So I think it is a wonderful new resource out there. Um, you know, it is creating, I think, some problems, right? In that if you were early on in it, you could build an audience easier because there was less competition. I think right now, there is a it's not a barrier to entry, but it's just an information barrier that there's so much content being thrown at you. How do you find the right stuff that is what you want? Especially when we live in a world where we are overwhelmed with uh, information every day, especially if you're in financial markets or doing macro research, something like that. I mean, there's just so much stuff, so much information thrown at you. How do you deal with it all? And so, I do think that we need to figure out some sort of better way to sort information there and figure out what's really your interest and what's really good out there. Because there's also a problem of there's a lot of stuff that's thrown up on Substack and other social media. I don't want to pick on Substack. It's across the board that frankly just isn't that good.
Yeah.
And yet people get trapped in because, oh, well, this is kind of interesting, but they don't know that there's lots of other stuff that's just as interesting on the same stuff that i- is much better, much higher quality.
Yeah.
Um,
I struggle with that a lot. The content is infinite, but our time is finite. I mean,
yeah.
and we have to be very jealous of how we allocate that. How do you deal with it? What's your information diet? And how do you make sure that you're focusing on the useful stuff?
That's particularly difficult given that I'm quite dyslexic, so I have a hard time reading. So I just jump around a lot. I look at a lot of different things, and I try and have a lot of different conversations with people that I find very interesting that then inspire me to go out and research things. And I will also say that other people have pointed this out back to one of your earlier questions. This is actually I'm finding is really really useful about AI. So I mentioned walking to work. So walking to work, you know, 4 or 5 years ago, I would have had these questions said, that's an interesting question. And then it would have been lost or I would have at some point, maybe gone and looked it up on the internet or something like that, or in a book many years ago.
If you
Now,
remembered. Yeah.
yeah, if you remembered. Now I'm like, um, I, ca- I just had one of these this morning. I can't remember what it was, but I'm like, oh, I just pick up my phone and ask one of the AIs, "Hey, what is this? What is the origin of this?" And all of a sudden, it'll explain all this stuff. And to our earlier point, some of that stuff might be wrong, but at least it's completely opened a new door. And now you start going and reading new articles and finding out new things. So for me, again, it's all this path dependence and just being curious.
Yeah, and it's what I find especially useful is the record that you asked that question, because again, we could get to our destination and have forgotten what we even asked.
Yes. No, that's tremendously useful, and, it's a little bit scary too, but I do find that it's getting a lot better at asking me questions back now
Yeah.
about so crazy thing, I've been baking my own bread, well before COVID. I've been baking my own sourdough bread for 30 plus years. Um, and I was trying to bake a new bread the other day, and I was just like asking Chat GPT these questions about, well, how should I do this? I'm having this issue with my bread. And it was bringing up all sorts of stuff that I'd asked it over the last year or so and said, "Well, knowing you, I know you have this tool in your kitchen and
Well, that's
this
weird.
and that." And, yeah, as I said, it's a little bit scary, but it was really interesting. It started asking me all sorts of questions about, "Well, are you doing this? What about this? Have you tried this?" And I'm like, "Wow."
That is so wild. I do have to make a slight suggestion here. I don't think baking bread is in your bio. I think you should add that.
Okay, okay, I'll throw that in there. Commercial salmon?
Ano
Oh, but
Another facet of your fascinating background. Now, I want to start winding up soon because you've been very generous of your time. Thank you so much for that. But a couple more things I want to get to. Now, one is, what's the hardest part for you of what you do?
uh I mean, I think the hardest thing is the marketing, I would say. Because, at the end of the day, it now has become my business. We talked about earlier, I would do this just
Hmm.
for the heck of it anyway. But obviously, I want it to succeed as a business. And one of the things that is just one of those tough lessons to learn over and over and over again is that marketing seems to be far more important than anything you actually do.
Yeah.
It does not matter how many things I get right, how many things I call it. Like, I, without trying to be arrogant, I would say literally nobody has come close to calling the major trends, especially the unexpected major trends in the global economy, as well as I have over the last 25 years, certainly the last 5 years, just off the charts. You just look at the Federal Reserve track record in the last year, or the economy, things like that. And I find myself like, why the heck aren't more people saying, coming?
Mm.
And it just comes back to marketing. You
Yeah.
you find that it really is marketing.
And it's hard. I think so many of us content producers make the mistake, and myself definitely included in this. Oh, we focus a lot on the content. I love producing content. It's what I want to do. I don't like marketing, so I don't do it. But that does sort of self defeat
Exactly.
in the end. Many of us are in that same boat. What is it you most enjoy about what you do? What gives you the biggest thrill? Is it the research? Is it the writing? Is it the hitting publish? What is it?
It's definitely exploring the questions and just sort of learning new, interesting things. I really love that aspect. I w- I would also say, you know, most of my revenue actually comes from institutional clients, who, uh, you know, also pay to talk to me, right? So it's not just what I write, and fortunately, the clients that I have now, unlike when I was at a bank where, I had to go to whatever the salesperson took me to, whichever client it was. And some of those clients were really interesting. Some of them were really boring. Some of them were abusive, some of them whatever. All of my clients that I have today are nice people I really like, and I really respect their intellect. I think they're really, really smart, engaging, interesting people, and they challenge my thinking, and that's a lot of fun for me.
I imagine it must be. I mean, you're definitely a people person, and then synthesizing those relationships into further insights and also creating a community. I think I saw that you are talking about pairing your insights with wine, and people like experiences in this very disconnected virtual world we live in. Actual experiences and gathering with like minded people is also something that
Yeah.
has a higher value these days.
Well, I mean, we just did it. It was something that I always wanted to do when I was on the sell side. Couldn't get any of the salespeople interested in this idea. My wife Joy, who does a lot of work in the background for me in terms of helping me with that marketing point I don't like, and one of my daughters, Monica, as well. is my social media with. But Joy was pushing me, said, "You should just do this. Like, why not? Why don't we just like organize a dinner and pair wine with your themes?" And so we did this,
Nice.
and it was kind of gimmicky, but it was fun, and we had a lot of great clients show up, and it was a really engaged discussion where people got to actually learn about these different wines. And yeah, that was a gimmick related to the theme, but then, we'd go into discussion of these themes that I see driving markets, and we had fantastic discussions about that. They actually had to kick us out at the end of the night because nobody wanted to leave. It was just such a fun time.
Putting chairs on the tables and all that. And I think that there's also an opportunity for people to make new friends, which
Mhm.
is priceless. That just simply
Yeah.
doesn't have a price. That is also two quick questions before we round up. What advice would you give a young person today wanting to work for themselves, research, somehow get paid for it? What advice would you give a young person starting out in newslettering today?
Ooh. Well, if we're talking specifically newslettering,
Mhm.
I would say go get some experience,
Mm.
because I think this is one of the biggest problems I see out there is all these people who write without perspective,
Yes.
right? And I'm sorry, this is going to be disheartening news to all these young people out there. I don't care how smart you are. I don't care what upbringing you have had. You frankly are not very interesting before you're at least 30 years old. You just don't have that much interesting to say. I'm sorry. This is my
Yeah.
life experience. I have not seen anybody who has that much interesting to say. Now, that doesn't mean that, like, if you want to do something technical or something like this, there's this classic stat that no buddy has become one of the top tier physicists if they haven't been discovered or done something by the age of 27, right? So there's a lot. It's not to say can't come up with creative ideas and things like that, but it's in a specific subject. But if you're just going to write newsletters, I'm sorry, you need to go out and actually get some experience. So that would be, if we're just focused on people doing newsletters,
Yeah.
very simple. Go
Young
get
people.
some experience.
Young people doing newsletters. And what advice would you give, say, a client of yours or a friend? I mean, our sort of age bracket, older, should we say, that comes to you and say, "Listen, I kind of want to change a career. I want a different lifestyle. I'm thinking of writing about what I know is Substack the right venue for me." What kind of advice would you give someone like that?
Well, I'd ask them what they think their real edge is. If they want to make it a business, then what is your real edge? What are you going to offer that somebody else doesn't have out there? And are you willing to do that marketing piece that we talked about? Because that's critical. Um, uh, and if you are, then jump in with both feet, right?
Mm.
Go run and go do it. Because I will note that my business was not taking off when I was just doing it on the side, trying to do this other business. I had a few dedicated people who knew me from my days on the sell side and wanted to subscribe because of that, but it wasn't going anywhere unless you really put effort into it. And once I did that, then it started to take off. So you have to be prepared for that. If you don't have that edge or you don't have others, it's just something that you really enjoy, then don't think about it as a living, but it's easy enough. Like, I was doing I was doing thematic markets and, quite sophisticated time consuming analysis while I was trying to build this other business. You can go do it. If that's what you want to do, you just want to write, go out there, go do it.
Yeah, and also the thing about putting yourself out there, you never know what's gonna happen, who's
Exactly.
gonna come across your writing. But I think you're right in that one mistake many people make is this, is this worth someone's investment? And even if it's a free newsletter, we still are investing our time in reading it. It has to be worth that investment. I can certainly say that seriously, Marvin, it doesn't have a paywall, but it is definitely worth the investment of our time. I speak for experience. That's how I came across you. Thematic markets. I would recommend everyone go and take a look at that because we know that Marvin is not only original, definitely has a lens that the other newsletters that swim in the same space do not have, given his experience, given his background, given his education, and given his character. And check
You're
out
very kind.
Thematic Edge is one of my favorite macro geopolitical podcasts out there. So that's definitely worth a download. Marvin, I can't thank you enough. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
audience, for joining us. And we'll hopefully see you all back here soon. Marvin, it's been an absolute pleasure. I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you very much, Noel. And thanks for all the audience joining.